I'm not going to lie, I feel like this one's going to be a bit more kind of off the rails just because there's a lot that I personally have to say on this idea of being avoidant and also wanting to be in leadership. And this comes from one, a lot of counseling, and two, my personal life, but it does actively, I think, lend itself to just the overall workplace that you want to have and the career you want to have. So that's what we're going to end up diving into today. I think that one of the biggest opportunities right now, still in leadership, is the ability to be self-aware and to actually self-correct when you aren't acting in your best or at your best and in the best interest of your team. And that's where I want to start this conversation. So, welcome back to the Keeping Everything Simple podcast. I'm your host, Michael Klukas, and here we try to boil down complex topics into simple, actionable tips. So looping it back around to the ability to identify when you're not acting in your own best interest or at your personal best and in the interest of your team. And honestly, I kind of suck at this. So I feel like I should explain that a little bit. So this idea of attachment theory, I was introduced to through counseling. And this was a couple years ago when I first got introduced to the theory, and it's come up again recently in my counseling and in my personal life as well. It's kind of this idea that there's three modes of attachment. And this is where attachment theory comes in. And yes, I'll loop it into leadership and everything. But we got to start here first because it's kind of the foundation of it. There is the anxious attachment, in which, and I'm probably going to explain this poorly, in which your anxiety around bonds and relationships causes you to seek them out for reassurance, but at the same time makes you dive into the very setting that can cause you anxiety because you want to crave the reassurance. The avoidant style of attachment, which is the second one and the one that, you can't see it on if you're listening to this on the podcast, but I'm kind of pointing to myself right now. That's the one that I unfortunately fall into, in that I tend to, if something goes wrong or something's like, boiling over in terms of thoughts, feelings, and emotions, I tend to push it back. I step back and remove myself from the situation in some type of way. And that's the avoidance style. And then we have secure, which, is the most preferable of the three. Because for the secure attachment style, you're able to more easily navigate the currents of emotions, the twisting events, the highs and lows that come, and you're able to do so in a way that gives you more grace and gives others around you more grace because you are in a secure style of attachment. And remember, disclaimer here, I am not a professional. This is stuff that I can talk about from my own personal experience, from the counseling I've had and the books I've read and the videos and podcasts I've listened to. So just bear that in mind. I feel that's important to repeat. Why I wanted to start there was simply because these styles of attachment, so anxious, avoidant, and secure, play out in all your relationships. So generally, if you read up about these or find books and videos, it's about your romantic partner. How do you relate to your romantic partner? Are you constantly seeking reassurance? If something has set off your anxiety, are you trying to go after them and get them to reassure you? Are you avoidant when something big happens? Do you pull back? Do you need space and say, I just need some me time to step away? Or are you secure? Are you able to address the issue head on, but still do so in a empathetic and tactful manner? Generally, that is the kind of conversations that you'll have or the material you'll read about attachment theory, because it did start out as a theory for bonding with your partners in the future. And it has grown, I believe. The understanding has changed to really focus on, I think, your relationships in general, and this means personal and professional. So for myself, as I mentioned a second ago, I do fall into the avoidant category. However, I also am lucky enough that I also have the secure category, and this is where it gets a little interesting, in that you can have a primary mode of attachment and a secondary mode. So my primary mode is, I think, the one that I am trying to redevelop to be the secure one, and that is the one we should all strive for. That is what I personally believe. And, for all intents and purposes, it sounds like it's going to be the best route. We should strive to have secure attachment. And this then also goes into the secondary, which is more so the one that I'm trying to get away from, which is my avoidant tendency. Now, I'm not going to dive into how all this is formed. I can just give you a broad overstatement that most of these attachment styles are formed in your youth and your adolescence, and they get redefined as you grow older and forge new relationships. Best simple way I can put that, because this is the show about keeping everything simple. You're welcome. But this is where this is where I really want to take this conversation with you guys, is that the ability to have a primary style is the one that you want to constantly adjust. So there was a saying that I heard long ago where there was, what your first reaction is, your knee-jerk reaction, is what you were raised to think and what you had developed when you were young. But your secondary reaction of, okay, I don't want to be that type of person. This is what I want to do, what I want to say, and who I want to be. That right there is the same methodology applied to the attachment theory and the attachment styles. Because for me, being avoidant is honestly a super big problem. Not in the way in which, I can't form good, meaningful relationships, or that I can't actively get big projects done and make big strides in my career. No. It's a problem because it creates these continual patterns, and it's essentially what I call the same problem, different color, different day. Because I can be doing the same exact thing over and over again and not recognize I'm being avoidant of a bigger issue. Maybe it's a bigger root cause. Maybe it's something that's been building up for a while and I just haven't wanted to address it. That is where the problem starts. And that does bring it back to this idea of leadership, where I wanted to take this, and that for the most part, if you understand your attachment style, you are better able to understand, I believe, the type of leader that you are. And I'm a big proponent of, the situational leadership style, where you can adjust your style of leadership to the person you're working with, make it adjust and fit the situation, and even step back, knowing that you won't always be the right leader for a situation. And that's why it's important, I believe, that you understand what style of attachment you have and how that style impacts your leadership. So, are you an anxious leader? If something goes wrong, or if you aren't sure if something's going wrong, that anxiety just kind of wells up in you, and you constantly then seek out the reassurance of someone else, or you constantly then feel that maybe things aren't going to go well. Maybe that you aren't good enough for it, or A, B, C, D, whatever it is, just that something sets off the anxiety and it kind of causes you to freeze or to feel like you can't move forward until that gets addressed. That'd be my thought process behind an anxious leader. If you're watching this on YouTube, let me know down in the comments, what do you think that kind of would reflect for you if you were someone that potentially has an anxious style of attachment, and how that impacts your leadership. And of course, the one I can speak to the best is the avoidant in leadership, the avoidant style of attachment. So for myself, it can be, hey, I feel something was wrong, or I feel like that kind of made me feel bleh and frustrated, or a little bit gypped. I say gypped, and I don't know if anyone else if that word's used very much anymore. I don't think it is, but I'm gonna stick with that. Okay, we're good. But the avoidance of, okay, something about this doesn't feel right. Let me just let it be. I will choose to step back and say, okay, this is not necessarily something that I want to deal with or feel the need to deal with. And that can be, one, because there actually is a need, or two, I just personally don't want to engage with the emotions and the situations that's resulting from it. And that's where the avoidance as a leader can really impact your ability to effectively initiate change and effectively create motion and forward momentum in the company and with your team. Because if you're always avoiding situations and stepping back, then you're not actually leading by example and doing your best to actively have everyone's best interest in mind, because you're thinking about how to get yourself out of the situation. And again, this is stuff that actively comes up in my personal life as well, because there are instances in which this avoidance style, in not wanting to address a situation or even kind of flipping a switch and letting myself just simmer emotions down so I can talk about something, isn't the best way to go about it. And I know this. I'm working on it. Counseling's helping a lot, but it's still just, it's the unfortunate reality that I deal with, in that it's hard at times to actively say, I know I need to face up to this, or I know I need to go at this head on, but something in my mind, in my emotions and my feelings just doesn't. And it sucks. It really sucks. And you can obviously then get a pretty good idea there of how that would suck in leadership too. To have a team member come up to you with a problem and say, all right, stuff is going really wrong at home. I need, and they start crying in the office. I need time. And then you step back. You're like, I don't know how to deal with this. I'm going to let you just cry it out, and then we'll end this meeting as soon as possible. Or you do have an idea of how to deal with it, but then you still kind of downplay your own thoughts to it, just so that way you can get through the situation. There's a lot of ways in which this avoidance in leadership can manifest itself, but it does come down to what I believe is taking ownership and extreme ownership of the situation. And I have a video, if you want to check it out, on YouTube about extreme ownership. But taking that ownership of the situation, of whatever you're going through and whatever someone else is going through, and knowing obviously that some things are completely out of your control. I don't want you to feel like you have to, lay claim to someone else's thoughts, feelings, and emotions, because you can't. Putting that out there, you can't, but you do impact them. And that's where this kind of has to be looked at from this perspective of, how can I get from this avoidance or anxious style into that secure style? The reason this whole idea about like the leadership and attachment kind of just like really though did come about is because this is something that I've said in the past, and I will continue to stand by, is leadership is about relationships. Leadership is literally built on relationships. You have a relationship with those who choose to follow you, those that are in your team, in your care. You have a relationship with them. And to understand your style of attachment, if you're avoidant, anxious, or secure, that is where it comes into play. It's so important to understand it. And so this is where, even though as I was talking about the avoidant and anxious leadership, the secure style leadership is what I would define as someone who, again, can weather the storm, can navigate the currents of emotions and thoughts effectively and meaningfully, while still holding the candle of empathy to light the way for the team. Because it can be super hard, especially when you're dealing with people, because people are irrational and people are illogical. And that's just kind of, our nature as humans. That is one thing that I believe to be true, but also something that I believe that we can adjust and understand to better ourselves and to better the world we have around us. So, reeling it back to leadership as relationships, understanding your style of attachment does let you then navigate and create a plan of action, I think, to get to that secure style of leadership. So this book, right here, you just keep it on the desk. Why You Do the Things You Do, The Secret to Healthy Relationships. So there's also going to be a link to this book in the description if you want to check it out. I highly recommend it. But the book itself does go over the ideas of leadership, or not leadership, but relationships. And it is from the secure, anxious, and avoidant. Now, it does kind of add in some other ones. So we have like the avoidant relationship style, the ambivalent relationship style, disorganized relationship style. Let's see, where else? Trying to find the other ones in here. Yeah, it doesn't say anxious attachment, but it still does go over it in a combination through the others of like disorganized and ambivalent. So I recommend this book. It is a more Christian-based book, but it still is very good at introducing this topic of attachment styles. And I recommend it if you want to at least know how these styles of attachment and this idea of attachment theory impacts your personal and professional life. And that's exactly why I recommend it. Because in some way, you'll probably find yourself in those pages, and unfortunately, this is just how it works. You probably may not always like what you see, because for those of us, when we're given at face value or instantly come up to see, oh, this is what it is that I do on a daily basis, and this is the style that I have, I don't like that. It can be very hard to recognize it and to accept it, especially when it's maybe not the most favorable outcome. But that's where we get the start line created. That's where we have ground zero to build up from there and say, okay, this is where I'm starting. What do I want instead? Where do I want to go instead? And how am I going to get there? If you like having goals, then this is where you have the opportunity then, after doing research or after reading these books and listening to the podcast, being able to say, what is a practice I can take? What is something they recommend? What is something I have found that lets me practice that secure attachment, whether you're avoidant or anxious or ambivalent and disorganized, according to this book? What are the small little steps, the small little changes? Because it's the repeated changes of a consistent nature that allow you to really change the foundation of who you are and really exhibit new things or create new things in your life. And that's where you can then, again, use that self-awareness and self-analysis, as I mentioned way earlier in the beginning of this episode, of am I able to be self-aware and say, okay, I'm feeling very avoidant of the situation. What are the action steps I want to take right now to maybe have a slightly different reaction? It doesn't have to be a total 180 that suddenly, oh, I'm avoidant today, tomorrow I'm going to be secure. No, it does not work like that. Trust me, I've had the thought process and it just doesn't work, because there still needs to be a strong foundation. If there is a huge tower built on only a couple little stone pillars of foundation, there's a probability that the tower is going to fall. So start small, start consistent, and figure out the goals you want to have for that. One of the big ones I recommend that, as an example, can be very actionable is learn to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. If someone's having a big emotional outburst or you're in the middle of a heated discussion, whether in your personal life or professional life, you're able to sit there with it and say, okay, this is what is happening. This is how I'm feeling about the situation, and it feels uncomfortable. It physically feels uncomfortable because of just the energy and the emotion that's here. But I need to sit with this. I can sit with this, and I can address it in a positive and empathetic manner. And that's just, again, one example of an actionable tip that you can try out. And there's definitely more out there, but that's just where I want to start this start this piece. And that is for the more concrete thinkers, or the ones that like that kind of tangible outcome. And the other piece of the puzzle is that you can even put it in an abstract concept, but it's still something that is a work in progress. You can think of it as a journey of development. Like, how are you going to get from point A to point B? How are you going to get from anxious or avoidant to secure? And that can be a long process. So it doesn't have to be you having a checklist of items. I personally am trying to live my life by checklist, but that's an entirely different conversation. But you can then say, how am I going to do this? How am I going to get there in a way that makes sense, in a way that is meaningful, and does allow me to build these new connections or rebuild connections in a way that is secure. And even if there's an underlying tone and that you understand that you'll have the secondary probably forever of what you first came from, so the avoidant or anxious, you do have the ability to then create that strong bridge to make that secure style your main style. And that can be a long journey. And that can be an abstract way of looking at this process and looking at this attachment theory as an actionable tip, still very much so, but one that you, again, don't believe will change overnight because you simply decided it would. And like I mentioned, I'm avoidant, and it still honestly sucks a lot because for my personal life, it's hard because there's so many things that I wish I would address or things that I wish I could change right away. Things like bringing up important matters or actively addressing the elephants in the room without feeling that wave of discomfort or being the one to initiate conversations because they're important. These are things that I'm bad at, and it really sucks that I can't actively just flip a switch and make it different. And that's something that I have to just come to terms with. It's not fun, and it really isn't. I've been in counseling for a couple years now. Since like 2019, I've been in counseling, and I'm still dealing with this. I'm still dealing with the fact that by nature, I avoid problems. I avoid jumping into kind of intense situations, at least ones in which I personally know I can't come in and just be a solution giver and fix the problems. And that reveals itself also in how I lead people. I want to come in with solutions, guns blazing and say, this is what we're going to do, A to Z, I got this, don't worry. That's not always what's needed. And then the other problem is also when I don't have the confidence to actually take on a problem or feel like I understand it enough to say something informative and insightful, then I just won't. And that does impact me negatively in terms of my professional career and my personal life because it prevents me from actively being true to myself and at the same time being true to others and letting them know this is where I'm at and this is why I'm here. And this is why I'm still in counseling. This is why this is so important and why I wanted to talk about with you guys today. Being able to say, am I avoiding a situation? Am I actively stepping back in a way I shouldn't be because it's easier? What am I doing that is making me want to stop in my tracks and say, I can't deal with this right now? There is a lot of trial and error that I've gone through and that I will continue to go through because of this. There's so much that I wish I could do a little bit differently and that I know is going to take me a while to get there. And so that's why I recommend things like why you do the things you do. So why I encourage reading books, why I encourage listening to podcasts, videos, working on yourself. And for me, it's been a big outlet. Like even this podcast, just sitting down and being able to talk about it is something that is an outlet because it's recognizing the shortcomings that I have. And that's something that in the past I hated doing. I still don't really like it because, I like to think that I can come in again, guns blazing and just be like, I got this. I'm going to solve every problem. Don't you worry about it. And that's not the type of person that I am. Unfortunately, I'm not a superhero. And I'd probably be Nightwing still. Moving on. It's still just this kind of trial and error that is the root of, again, the foundation that I'm personally building. I'm merging together that concrete and abstract where I'm trying to make a foundation that's solid, that understands the secure style of attachment because that's the style I want. And my journey of building this tower to get it to the point where the avoidant is, built in here and there. That's unavoidable. Well, that's ironic and totally, okay, moving on. To have that tower be a secure style of attachment that I can go to and knowing full well that there will be pieces of avoidance still there, but the primary is secure. I want to be secure in my leadership. I want to be secure in who I am as an individual. I want to be secure in my relationship and attachments to others. It's also recognizing and accepting that the avoidance style is gonna be there with me still. Like, I don't expect myself to be able to just obliterate it. And all the books you will read, most likely, there's probably going to be an example or two where it says, yeah, when you're in a hard spot, you can accidentally default back to that original primary style of attachment. Like, you can be secure all day long, but then at the end of the day, you and your partner have a heated argument, you and a team member or a coworker get into it, and you instantly default back to that previous attachment style. And that's okay. It's just recognizing that and having the self-awareness to self-correct, which again is something that I think is largely lacking for a lot of people, and especially for those in leadership, because you will have to put in twice the amount of work, 3 times the amount of work is something I believe to keep getting better. Because if you want to lead your team, you want to lead them with empathy. You want to lead them with their best interest in mind and know full well that, hey, you may not have all the answers, but you've at least taken a couple steps forward in a direction that they want to go. And you can lead that way and light that path for them. And this is my challenge to you guys for this week. I want you to at least look up what style of attachment you think you are. There's plenty of tests out there. There's plenty of ways in which you can really confirm it or deny it. But that is what I want you to do. Find a test online, take the quiz, read a book about it, but just do something that will help you solidify your understanding of what potentially is your primary style of attachment. And from there, figure out, what do you want to be? Who do you want to be? And how do you want to exist in this world? And that just means once you have that primary style and you understand it a bit more, work towards the secure style of attachment. If you're already there, hey, that's good for you. You still don't get to the rest on your laurels. You still got a lot of work to do as well, because this idea of development is a never-ending process. There's always room for improvement, and that's where you're going to have the most fun, I believe, as you go through and put in the work to get better, to get healthier. And remember, leadership is all about relationships, and relationships are the foundation of our lives, especially as the social creatures that we are. Comment down below if you're watching this on YouTube, what do you think your style of attachment is? Because that does determine so many things about the direction you get to go in, or that you choose to go in, because it gives you a compass to work from. And be sure to like this video on YouTube, subscribe to it on your favorite podcast app, give us a rating on the iTunes Store. It helps us out so much to connect with other people just like you. I hope you have an amazing day, you amazing people, and go out there and do great things. I'll see you in the next episode.